Kia ora koutou katoa and welcome along to another episode of Beyond the Hustle. My name is Anton Matthews and I am one of the proud owners of Hustle Group. Hustle Group is a whānau-owned business and we work very, very hard to provide remarkable, awesome hospitality experiences throughout our various venues and offerings here in Ōtautahi. We're also champions of normalising te reo Māori and we try very hard to weave it throughout our various businesses and kaupapa as much as we can. And this podcast is about going beyond all of that mahi. And it's an opportunity for me to sit down with really awesome people who I love, who I admire, who I look up to, and who I generally just find really interesting. And in today's episode, I had the great privilege of sitting down with Carl Davidson, who is the owner, director, and founder of Truwind Research First. I've known Carl now for over a decade, and he's been an awesome customer and guest in all of our businesses for a very long time. Every time I get the opportunity to sit down with Carl, I take it because it's always insightful. We talked a lot about social health and the alarming increase in loneliness in today's day and age. And more importantly, what we can do as individuals and as a society to try and solve for some of those really big systemic issues. So if that stuff is interesting to you, then hang around and let's get into it. Kia ora, Carl. Thank you very, very much for making time and space in your calendar to be on the podcast today.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
A long-time listener, first-time guest.
I feel like a talk show host. No, I really appreciate it, mate. I know you're a really busy person, and obviously we've known each other for a long time, but I don't think we've necessarily sat down and had a conversation like this before, which is pretty cool. It's exciting. But for those that are watching who maybe aren't familiar with the type of mahi that you do, can you tell me how you typically describe what it is that you do and also why you're so passionate about it?
Yeah, sure. So I work in what's called the insights world, the market research world. But we say that we're a market research company with a social science heart, right? Because anybody that studies social science is taught and embodies the idea that the purpose of social science isn't just to understand the world, but it's to change it, right? So how do we use evidence to build a better world? That's essentially the game we're in. So my background's in psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science. I've jumped between the university and the corporate world a number of times. And the whole point is how do we help businesses, communities, organizations be better, make smarter choices?
And you've been doing it for a long time, over 30 years?
Oh, I hate to think. I've been in the insights game for 30 years, which is staggering.
So, and you're also the founder and director of Truwind?
Yeah, it's now called Truwind because we're working in the Pacific, originally called Research First. Truwind's a master brand, so we can spin off other companies underneath it. But yeah, that's been going for 19 years this February.
It's pretty massive. Not many people get to, do business for that long and still be in business.
Right.
Look, I know over the years you would have covered lots of different kaupapa and explored lots of different things. What's got you really excited at the moment?
Yeah, excited's probably the wrong word for reasons I'll explain in a minute. But the work that I am most proud of is the work we're doing around social connection, disconnection, and loneliness.
Okay.
So there's a program of work that actually you helped us name called Te Mori o Tatahi, which is a piece of work we've done looking at the arc of the recovery of Christchurch out of the earthquakes. And it's covered a lot of things over the years, but one of the things that it's really zoomed in on in the last few years is the increasing incidence of loneliness in Christchurch. It turns out it's a global phenomenon, but we rebuilt a city, right? We had the opportunity of thinking about how can we build a city to overcome loneliness and isolation and dislocation. So that piece of work's really exciting me, although the longer you spend talking to people who are chronically lonely, the more depressing it gets.
Yeah, I can imagine it's pretty disheartening. You talked about it being a global thing, so it's not like it's tied necessarily to the earthquakes and what we've done after that. This is happening all around the world?
Largely industrialized economies. So it's largely a product of nuclear families. Absolutely, there's an element of, capitalism in there about individuals being the unit of analysis, not communities, not family and whānau. So there's a bunch of stuff going on in there. But we had the opportunity, of course, of designing a city, urban design, community design, the way we support services, to making sure that we address it, right? We could have been the friendliest, the most inclusive city. I mean, one of the things social scientists work on is societies run on kind myths, right? There's a bunch of things we say about ourselves which just are not true. So in New Zealand, we like to think that we're incredibly active and fit. Not true. New Zealand's one of the obesest countries in the world.
Is that right?
Yeah, we don't participate in formal sport very often. In Christchurch, we like to think that the mosque shooting made us all more welcoming of people from other cultures. Not true at all. We like to think that the earthquakes made us more receptive to our neighbours, more neighbourly, much more focused on community. Not true at all. These things had a blip, but they don't last, right? And so thinking about the myths we tell and the gap between the myths we tell and the social reality, that's the job of the social scientist.
Why do you think we tell ourselves myths? And I mean, it doesn't just stop there, because as you're saying those things, I mean, it's one thing for someone to come on and say what you've just said, that, the mosque attacks made us more accepting of other people, but it's not true.
Yeah.
Except that you say it because you've done the research, and I take it you're saying that because you've got some evidence to back that up.
And there's often a blip, right? Let's not forget, there was a period after the earthquakes when we all were kindler and gentler. There was a period after the pandemic when we were kindler and gentler. In fact, a journalist called me during the pandemic and said, what do you think's going to happen after the pandemic as a result of the pandemic? And I said, if you're a betting person, in the long term, things are going to go back to like what they were.
Yeah.
In the absence of us wanting to freeze those settings through policy, like deliberately trying to come up with a kindler, gentler world community, people are just going to go back to their old ways of doing things because human behavior has so much inertia in it.
So did we miss an opportunity, or do you think we should be freezing some of these things in policy? Is that the answer? Or
yeah, well, the question then becomes, what do we freeze, right? So this is hilarious, but if you ask most people, what does a lonely person look like? What pops into your head?
A lonely person, I don't know why, but I'm going to someone who's a bit older.
Yep.
Perhaps they've lost their spouse, and so by default they're sort of living on their own, probably living in a small flat or something like that, and don't have necessarily a good grasp on technology, so they can't connect with their loved ones.
And look, there's plenty of loneliness amongst that cohort, but the greatest incidence of loneliness is between people 18 and 25.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I've actually heard some stuff around this, so tell me about that, because that's scary. I wouldn't have picked that.
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of things going on. There's a guy called Jonathan Haidt, and his work's contested, but there's a guy called Jonathan Haidt who makes 2 points that I love, and it's a great thought as a parent, although, I mean, your kids get plenty of time outdoors. Jonathan Haidt's argument is we've done two things simultaneously. We have massively underprotected our kids in an online environment, and we have massively overprotected them in the real world. Right? So we've emptied our kids' life of particularly unstructured play.
Yep.
Right? And he would make the argument, and I'm guilty of this as anybody, but that horrific word play date. The idea that you
go to someone's house
to play.
Okay.
Right. As opposed to old-fashioned doorstep play.
Knock on the door.
Play on the street.
Yep.
This is what I was talking about urban design, right? Like most streets are unsafe for playing in. Playing in the streets discouraged. Houses are designed so they face away from the road. There's a whole lot of things going on. But so unstructured play has gone down.
Okay.
And, kids are online where they're massively underprotected. So they're developing a completely different way to what they did 20 years ago.
I mean, you just said some off-the-cuff things, but honestly, they're not things I'd ever considered about, for example, the way we design streets. Yeah. I mean, what makes a street safe? A cul-de-sac. Is that what it is? Like, what makes streets more unsafe today than they were, say, 20, 30
Well, in fact, they're not more unsafe, but people think they are. This is that beautiful distinction between subjectivity and objectivity, right? Like, if you look at crime statistics, old people are most fearful of crime, and so their behavior reflects that fear, but they're least at risk of crime. The people who are least fearful of crime, men 18 to 25, are by far the most likely to experience crime.
Why?
Drinking, violence, things like that. I mean, look, it's a long story, but part of the way you construct your view of the world is a thing called availability bias, right? Like what's most available to your mind. And if what you're doing is watching TV and looking at the media and it's telling you stories of a violent world, you are going to think that violence is much more prevalent than it really is. TV's not telling you great stories about neighborhoods, family, community. It's telling you stuff that gets your attention, right?
Yes.
So in terms of, what makes for a great neighborhood, knowing your neighbors makes for a great neighborhood. Walkable streets, having places to linger. Go down any modern street we build in Christchurch and just count how many places there are to stop and sit.
Not many.
Not many. And you need opportunities for serendipitous meetings, right? Well, most people aren't doing that because you're driving into your garage, closing the garage door behind you, going to your house and living in your life at the back of the street. So the urban design has a huge impact on this. But so do things like schools. We drive our kids to schools, formal sport. Just a whole lot of things are pushing us towards a much easier life as individuals. And then think about technology. Think about meal delivery systems, streaming services, all of those things that enable you, essentially, if you want, to live your life behind your front door and never engage in the public realm.
Even what you said around the way that we're designing homes, we don't have front yards anymore.
No.
Because typically homes become built on much smaller plots anyway. So, where do you put the little amount of land that you've got? Probably at the back, so that you can hang out in your spa.
Yeah, but think about how they solved that in the 19th century. You put it across the road in a park that's available to all the houses that are built around it. So you don't have much space, but there's public space where there are lots of eyes on that public space, so it's safe, and your kids can go and play in it. The reason I care about this stuff is I know you've interviewed lots of guests about things like physical health and mental health. I'm a huge fan of both of those things. But if you're thinking about well-being, you have to think about social health. So being chronically lonely, and about 1 in 12 New Zealanders report being chronically lonely, right? That means I am lonely all of the time.
Wow. 1 in 12.
1 in 12. We are surrounded by lonely people, but no one talks about it. People don't like talking about loneliness because they think that it reflects something fundamental about them. In psychology, there's a great distinction between a state and a trait. Trait is something you have, and a state is something you're in. So,
can you explain?
Yeah, so a trait might be, you might be the kind of person that has a short temper. And that might be your trait of Anton. He's just got a short temper.
Okay.
A state is you find yourself in particular situations feeling angry, right? So that's caused by the state rather than a trait.
Okay.
People think that loneliness is a trait. It's something that sticks to me like a bad smell, whereas it's not. It's a state. It's a place you find yourself in when the social settings are wrong, where you lose touch with your friends, all of those things. You don't catch loneliness, right? But people don't like talking about it. In fact, people are more likely to talk about depression than they are about loneliness, feelings of loneliness. But if you are chronically lonely, it is as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
How do you quantify something like that?
Well, that's a huge study out of Europe, right? And they do it on lifespan and health span. In fact, what that study says is the single best thing you can do to increase your longevity, and they really mean health span rather than lifespan, is be socially connected.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, but it isn't, right? It's fascinating as long as you think of the world as being made up of individuals competing with each other. But if you actually think about the history of the world, human beings are tribal creatures.
I agree.
Like, human beings are social creatures, and we know this because what is the worst punishment we have in the West for criminals? What do we do with them?
Put them in isolation, put them in
prison. Solitary confinement. We know we do that. We enforce loneliness on them because we know that loneliness is profoundly aversive. And yet here we are in a society where maybe 8% of people have that loneliness all the time. And I should have said at the beginning, loneliness is not solitude, right? So lots of people say, I love spending time on my own. So time that you choose to spend on your own, that you've chosen and you enjoy, is solitude. Solitude's an important part of your mental health. It's an important part of almost any spiritual tradition. Loneliness is time that you spend on your own that you didn't choose and you don't enjoy. And that feeling, that physiological feeling of loneliness, can be thought of as a psychological signal like thirst. Thirst is a signal telling you need to drink something. That loneliness, that heartache, is a signal telling you need to connect.
And so then what stops us from connecting? Is it that we don't have the skills? Because we've certainly got the technology, apparently, to be able to easily connect with people. Are we lacking confidence? What is it that's preventing 18 to 25-year-olds from getting out there and connecting?
Well, it's a great point. They are connecting, but they're connecting online. And what we're discovering is, while online connections is an important part of what it means to be human, it's not sufficient. Like, a network is not a community. Right, so a social network is not a community, and building community, feeling like you belong in a community. I know there's that wonderful Maori concept, tūranga waiwai. We don't have anything equivalent in English, but there's a concept in sociology called ontological security, which is an ugly word, but it means a continuity, right? A continuity in your story, traced back to your family, but a continuity in the story that takes you into the future.
Okay,
a place where you belong and a story to tell. Very similar to Tūranga Waiwai. That's what you need to have good social health. And in the West, we've been terrible about that. We've been really big on geographic mobility to find work and we built families and houses around nuclear families.
To our detriment.
To our detriment. And there's been benefits, right?
Yeah.
There's been huge benefits, but there's also been huge psychological costs.
I mean, one of the things that's kind of sprung up in the last, I guess, 10, 20 odd years is, aged care residential.
Yep.
Is that our effort to try and solve part of this problem for?
Well, it's interesting. Like, look, once upon a time I would have said investing in retirement villages has got to be golden, lock solid investment. But at the same time, it's a reflection of how poorly we look after our elderly, isn't it? Like, you think about other societies, they'd come and live with you, or you'd go and live with them, right? But we put them in retirement homes. It's funny because we've done a lot of work in that sector, and the decision maker often about a retirement village is the daughter. Like, it's often the daughter working for mum, because dads usually die before mums. And they have tremendous guilt about that.
Right.
Like, they're not present enough for their mums, often doing all that, what sociologists call emotional housework, feel tremendous guilt about it. So they often look for the best provider and the best providing package. I feel this way about raising kids as well. I mean, we took all the Western advice when we raised our kids, particularly around sleep, getting them to sleep in other rooms. But the more you read the history of childcare, the more you think you should just let your baby sleep in your bedroom with you.
Really?
Yeah, that's what anthropologists would say. It's what we've done. Human beings were hunter-gatherers for 350,000 years. Like, almost everything about the way that we approach the world, our brains are perfectly adapted for that kind of living. And they're really, really poorly adapted for the last 2,000 years of civilization.
And what are the major changes with respect to our social health that we've made since those hunter-gatherer days versus in the last 2,000?
Well, atomization, right? Atomization is clearly one. We've moved away.
What does that mean?
Splitting into small groups rather than into tribes. That idea that it takes a village to raise a kid, right?
Yes.
It's a tribal notion. But there's a whole lot of other things as well, about great sense of identity, a great sense of place. Obviously, one of the problems is, it was one thing being hunter-gatherers when the population of the earth was a few hundred million.
Yeah.
A bit harder when there's 8 billion of us, right? And one of the great marvels from a social science point of view is that you can cram human beings together in such a small place and they just don't all kill each other.
Yeah.
Like, we've done a pretty good job through civilization of overcoming a lot of those natural tendencies.
It's interesting. And you sort of just touched on it really quickly about parenting. I know you're a parent. I'm a parent as well. Hearing some of the things that you're describing, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what can I do differently, better? How can I change my environment to make sure that I'm giving my own tamariki the best kind of opportunity to overcome some of that stuff? Have you got any insights that you can share?
Well, there's a meta insight. Let's go back a step and then we'll go forward.
Okay.
So much of when it comes to well-being, so much of the stuff we read and hear and recycle is American, right? Rather than European. And this matters because America has a very different way of looking at the world and your role in the world, right? And the distinction that social scientists make is between structure and agency. Agency is what can you do? Structure is what can we do as a collective through setting laws, setting taxes, training people, right? And almost all of the stuff we read from America is about agency. How do we look after our well-being? What do we do about inclusion or whatever it is?
So the onus is on the individual.
On you, right? Right. It's all about you. And that's cool. We absolutely have to have some agency. But there are some things which we also need to fix at a structural level. And so a lot of these problems need structural solutions to make sustainable rather than individuals. So, what could you do about childcare? Well, the first thing you can do about childcare is you can have much longer maternity leave, right? You can make early childhood education free. Like, there are some things you could do with settings, policy, tax, that would actually make everybody's life easier. But we choose not to do that.
Right. I don't know how many times over the years I've heard people make statements like, part of the problem is it's social media.
Yeah.
It's just a really easy thing to go and blame all of the world's problems on is social media or the internet, and soon it'll be AI, and every generation thinks that they're better than the next generation and so on. But are there any truths to some of that stuff?
Well, again, a great social science trick is to always ask the question, what if the thing you assume is the problem is actually a symptom?
What do you mean?
So, you think about what's going on in American politics at the moment. It's easy for a lot of people who are, in a hurry to go, it's all about Trump.
Exactly.
Trump's ruining everything. Unless you think that Trump's symptom of what's wrong rather than the cause, right? Actually, we have a Trump because we've got this increasing polarization of society,
Right.
and a whole bunch of angry people for whom Trump is a symptom rather than a cause. If you think of social media as a symptom of something much more fundamental rather than a cause of it, it becomes much more interesting. Like, social media becomes the mechanism by which kids can stay home and socialize. It enables them to do things, but why are they motivated to do them? Like, why haven't we created in them, the opportunity to play in their neighborhood with their friends, to connect face to face easily, right? I mean, even think about my life. If Lucy, who's 13, for God's sake, said to me, I'm just going to get on my bike and ride off to Hornby to go and see one of my friends, we would have thought nothing of that when we were young. But now there's no way my wife would let her. So connecting with her friend via whatever the latest app is much easier for her.
Yeah.
So you've got to have to start thinking about what's the problem behind the problem. A lot of this goes to what's called social capital, the kind of thing that holds us together as a society, a community, and a group. And there's a guy called Robert Putnam who was writing about this back in 2000 in America. He wrote a book called Bowling Alone, a famous book. And he was basically saying you can track kind of the decline of American community by looking at the decline in bowling leagues.
Okay, interesting.
And what was interesting is the same number of people were bowling as ever, but they were just bowling on their own.
As opposed to in teams.
Yeah, so instead of being in a formal team and going bowling on a Tuesday night, you'd go down maybe with one mate and go bowling. And he was like, this is a symptom of something really fundamental about our social health. And it's funny because I was teaching that book. I was an academic at the time. And I remember reading it thinking, it sucks to be American. Glad that's not ours.
But it's happening.
And 25 years later, you go, how prescient was he?
So when we sort of zoom out and we look at the situation, 2025, we look at our population, we see these emerging trends like you talked about, loneliness becoming more prevalent amongst young people. What do we need to do if we accept that that's not a good thing? We don't want
we want to end loneliness.
Yeah. How do we do that?
God, that's
I know that's $1 million question.
If you answer that, they'd knight you. There are campaigns to end loneliness. The UK had a loneliness minister, right? There are things we can do. If we go back to agency, one of the great psychological insights is some people often don't talk to strangers because they think that would be unwelcome. But what the research shows is that people are always happier to talk to you than you expect.
Right.
Like encouraging people to reach out is a great one. There's and this is the agency thing, right? There's a psychologist called Nick Epley that says something I love. He says, not many people wave, but everybody waves back. So you be the one who waves.
That's interesting.
That's easy, right? That's a behavioral change.
Yep.
And a lot of it's about awkwardness, right? About not wanting to feel socially awkward. But other than that, what we can do is we can think about how do we create situations to allow people to bump into each other who wouldn't otherwise bump into each other. And you can do that, like the university could do that through a campus design. You can do it through urban design. You can do it through policy settings. You can do all sorts of things. In the Scandinavian countries, they're putting early childhood centres next to retirement homes.
Cool.
Because then you've got two groups of people that have lots of free time. But the thing, the reason I've talked to you about this stuff before is one of the things that really matters in healthy communities are things called third spaces. And a third space is not your home and not your work, but another place you can go that feels like home, where everybody knows your name.
Yep.
And this is the amazing thing that you've managed to do with your Joes and with Fush and other things. But half of the people in Christchurch don't have a third space.
Half?
46%.
So does that mean we're spending time at home and at work and then nowhere else? There's nowhere normal that we go on a regular basis?
No. For 46% of people, there's nowhere they regularly go that fulfills that. Now, once upon a time, that would have been a church. It might have been the rugby club or the league club.
Yes.
In England, it might be the pub. Pub means public house.
True.
In New Zealand, it might be a cafe. Pubs and cafes are problematic because you have to pay to play, right? You can't just rock up and hang out there. But that idea of having a space where people can come together and where they feel like they belong, that's a hugely important part of building community.
So is that one of the big shifts that we've had in the last, I don't know, whatever period of time, couple of generations maybe? Slowly but surely, we've lost a lot of those third spaces.
Yep.
And that's perhaps what's leading to some of this?
Well, I think, again, is it a cause or effect, right? That's the other thing. Is it a cause or effect? One of the things that's led to the decline of third spaces is people feeling time poor. Like people feeling they don't have the time to do that because they're working two jobs or
right.
running around looking after kids or whatever it is.
So you're saying that potentially we've lost the third space because people don't necessarily feel like they've got time to go and engage in that. So that is the effect of, but the cause is actually way back here.
And one of the things we're trying to do at Truwind Research First through the teaching we're doing is when we talk to organizations about well-being or individuals about well-being, just put social well-being front and center. Like, everybody knows they've got to watch what they eat, look after their move, look after their sleep, take care of their mental health. What are you doing to take care of your social health?
Are we hanging out with friends less nowadays? I mean, obviously we are. If there's a loneliness,
Well, so the loneliness problem is also called a friendship recession.
I've not heard that before.
Yeah. So in the UK, something like 20% of men say they have no close friends. The number of close friends the Americans say they have has gone down by 50% in 20 years. Friendship takes effort. Takes effort. And it's really interesting. Middle-aged men in particular have huge problems when it comes to social connection and loneliness for two reasons. The first is a lot of them suffer from what's called weekend loneliness. So they have very busy working lives, come home, have nobody who's a real friend outside of work they can hang out with on the weekend. So there's this sort of this weekend of loneliness. And the other thing that happens post-divorce is they discover that their wives typically curate their social life. Right. So post-divorce, they've got no friends, right? So men in particular have to become better at building friendship, which is why I love what Matthew Steens and the Yarnsmen are doing, right? Because that's about how do you help men build better relationships with other men by telling authentic stories.
I have heard, and it's kind of related more so to the potential, problem around loneliness for younger people. But one of the unfortunate consequences of, say, online dating is where typically once upon a time you would go into a cafe or a bar or a nightclub or whatever, and it was all of the men and all of the women who were in the nightclub. That was the pool of potential to choose from, and whoever bumped into each other and hit it off, that was how relationships and stuff were born. Now it's much different. We're not necessarily bumping into people at the cafe or the restaurant, but we're looking online, and the pool of potential online is much, much bigger. And so we kind of get this profile, this dating profile, as our opportunity to communicate with everybody else on the internet who's interested in looking for a relationship. And so that profile is quite important. And we know that humans, we are particularly shallow, and so the profile picture is really, really important. Anyway, the knock-on effect of all of this is that there's the old 80-20 principle where there's 20% of the people at the top who are getting 80% of all the action, but the opposite side of that equation is that there's a whole bunch of people who are not getting any action at all. And those people once upon a time in a whole different era would have got a little bit of action and no longer getting any action at all. When we think about that has tremendous
that's the incel phenomenon, right? Effect. I mean, there's so much in that to think about. So first of all, as I said before, a network's not a community. Like online dating's one thing. But one of the problems that online dating or any of that stuff has is a problem called miswanting. I love this word, right? Miswanting, which is people often don't know what they want.
Okay.
Like you put together a profile, this is what my perfect partner looks like. But actually you just love who you love, right? Like, and you need to bump into a lot of different people so you can actually work out what you want other than just having it shaped for you by the media or whatever you're watching online. So, you think you want X, Y, and Z, but actually you might not want one of those things at all. Actually, the person you end up loving looks completely different, behaves completely different, but you just love them. The idea of putting together a profile that has lists of qualities you want in a person other than kind of those eulogy virtues, those fundamental character virtues, it's just insane. It's a path to madness.
The other thing, I didn't understand everything that you, probably the depth of what you just said. So we put together profiles. Let's say, thankfully, I didn't have to do this. This is a little bit after my time, but I'm married, so it's all good. But if I had to start over again, if I'm my 20-year-old self, I'm putting up a profile and I'm putting a list of things that I think other people want, that would like about me.
Exactly, right.
But you're saying that's mad.
Well, it's mad because, no, it's potentially mad because those, if you like, are features, right? Yeah. And actually, that's not why people fall in love with you. Just didn't fall in love with you because you have a shopping list of features, right? And, they might be some of the good things about you, but that's not why she fell in love with you. Right. And so you've got to be thinking, this is why old-fashioned matchmaking is such a better idea than speed dating. Like, with somebody who knows you and knows somebody else, who can actually work out what a good fit might look like. And the miswanting thing is when you start thinking, this is what I'm looking for in my partner.
Yep.
Because it's so easy to be blindsided by, well, look, I'm going to need somebody who's tall, who's blonde, who's a lawyer, who's into CrossFit or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
None of those things matter in terms of a relationship. And that thing I was talking about eulogy virtues comes from the work of a guy called David Brooks, who wrote a book called The Road to Character, which I love. And he said, one of the problems we have, again, in the West is we spend all of our lives pursuing resume virtues, things you can put on your resume, awards, jobs, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But actually, all that really matters is what people are going to say about you in your eulogy, which are your eulogy virtues, which are things like he was generous, he was kind, Those are the things we should be thinking about. How do we build and work on? But nobody goes on a course to learn about
being kind, generous.
No one even talks about character anymore. We talk about reputation and personality. We've moved away from conversations about character, but in the 19th century, all anybody talked about was your character.
Do you think we should go back to that?
I mean, certainly having a conversation about character rather than about here's 5 things on my Tinder profile is going to be much more useful. But the other thing, of course, is what the feminists say about dating apps is the last thing the world needs is a way for men to be more non-committal and more lazy, which is what dating apps have done, right? We've created a world where men can be even less committal and even more lazy. Like, great.
Yeah, and so the last part of what I was explaining before is that, okay, if we play this out over a long enough time horizon, we end up with this group of people, and if we just focus on, say, young men for now, who once upon a time in another era would have had a little bit of action, but are now getting absolutely none. So it's not that they've gone from having occasional, romantic relations. Now they're getting absolutely none. And they almost end up building resentment against the other side.
No, totally. This is the incel movement, right? Yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah.
I don't know if scary is the right word. It's just, it's cause for concern.
Yeah. So when I talk about loneliness, there's always somebody who says robots and AI will solve this. And they're right to a certain extent. Companion robots, AI companions, they're not a solution, but they're, in the absence of a genuine solution, they're not the world's worst response, right?
Yeah.
So the thing about that group of people is, there's already a market for sex robots. There's completely a way of dealing with that, not getting any action problem through technology. She says, do you want to live in that world? Because the other thing I was going to say when you were talking earlier is the great thing about teenagers today as a parent is they are having much less casual sex than we did. They're getting drunk far less and they're taking far fewer drugs. And as a parent, you think that's great.
It is
But
great.
the reason that all that's happening is they're not going out. Right? It's not that they're going out and not doing those things. It's because they're staying home.
Yeah.
Right? And so you go, well, there's a price to pay. Right?
Because when you say young people nowadays are having less casual sex than they were in the past, that does almost feel counterintuitive to
the Tinder thing. Yeah.
But what you're saying is it's because they're actually not going out in the same way that they were.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And I mean, it makes me very, very aware of, I've got a 12-year-old daughter, 10-year-old son, and a much younger girl, thinking about the world that they're moving into, they're growing into. I feel like I should be doing more. I feel like I should be more aware of some of this stuff.
Let me assuage some of those fears, right? I worked in the area of family policy for years when I was at the Families Commission. Ostensibly about reducing family violence, but really about what can we learn about families. And the thing that I took away from those 3 years in that organization is your kids very rarely listen to what you say, but they always watch what you do.
Interesting.
Yeah, like if you want to be a good parent, model good parenting, right? Model the behavior you want your kids to do. Don't tell them, show
them.
Yeah.
You talked earlier on about those third spaces, and we had a bit of a chat before we jumped on camera about this. As the world becomes faster, more efficient, potentially more chaotic, where do you see the importance of in real life experiences, those third spaces? How is it going to play? How important is it going to be moving forward?
Well, I think it's going to be critical. In general, with my marketing hat on, what we say to organizations is, as the world becomes more saturated with online offerings, the premium offerings will be high touch. There will be in real life experiences. Like you think about now in the public space, where can you go not to be assailed by advertising? You can go to the kōrero Club, right? You can go to you go to a premium experience. So the problem becomes, how do we make those experiences available to people that don't have the resources for them, which is a policy issue and a distribution issue. But people crave high touch experiences. You just get people to talk about, tell me about the best time you had, best memory, tell me a story. They're very rarely online stories.
Yeah.
Online is a great enabler. I'm not
knocking it.
I'm not a technology skeptic. I think technology is brilliant, but we have to think about technology as a tool to achieve the goals that we all agree we want to achieve, and not to let technology set its own agenda. And that's the scary.
So then, you mentioned the kōrero Club.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say that one more time? So the kōrero Club is a place where you can go.
Well, I always think about it when I go there, right? Like you have to pay to be a member of the kōrero Club, but you go to the kōrero Club and it's an oasis of sanity where people aren't assailing you with advertising, getting you to buy things, right? Because what we've done with the public space is we've let it over to the commercial world where it's all about clamoring for things.
Yeah.
But that idea of having that, if you think about that moment of relaxing and calm, that's what third spaces can do for you. It's a place where I can relax, where I know what I'm going to get. I feel like I belong. I feel validated.
So you know what I do.
Yeah.
And you've been a great customer of ours for a very long time, a decade in fact, at Joe's Wigram. For people like me who are in the types of businesses that we're in, I mean, I'm incredibly biased, but I love hospitality. I love the idea of creating a space where people can come together and share some of those high touch moments.
Yep.
What advice would you give to me and other hospitality owners about what should we be planning for, or where are the opportunities for us to set ourselves up to be those third spaces for people as we become more and more lonely?
Yeah. So, I mean, my first thing is I just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing because you do it so very, very well. But I'd also suggest you stop being so modest about it. Like if you see the connection as part of the value proposition, I mean, you talk about it anyway, but talking much more about that being the value proposition.
I think we talk about it accidentally.
I do too, and I don't think it's an associate benefit of coming to Joe's. I think it's one of the primary benefits of coming to Joe's. You know, the price for coffee and food is the price you pay for the engagement with your staff and the engagement with other people there. The question becomes, how do you build an online presence that enables people to stay connected to that in those moments when they can't come and be part of the physical face-to-face piece, right? So how do you do that? And then the other thing is, how do you reproduce that? I don't know what lightning you put in a bottle in Wigram, but if you were going to go and do that, I mean, you probably did that at Sumner, but if you're going to open a new one in Rolleston, how would you make sure that you have that same mix so it still feels like it's I mean, it's surrounded by cafes now, but I think that Joe's Wigram is an anchor in that community. That's how I feel about it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the short answer, if you're asking me, I guess it comes down to the people and making sure, and we've become a lot more, I guess, aware of, because the thing is, when you're small, and we started out much smaller at Joe's in Sumner,
right?
And it was, there's about 10 of us. And because I was in the business all day, every day, you always kind of have your finger on the pulse, and then you get a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
But we knew enough people that we were able to assemble this rock star team over at Wigram and keep things going at Sumner. But as you get bigger and bigger, you run out of people that you know, that you know really, really well, and you go, yeah, you'd be a great fit. So now you're going out to the market and you're trying to find the right fit. And we've got it wrong on occasions. But as we've gotten bigger and bigger, we've become a lot more aware of how important, I mean, that is the lightning in the bottle. It's just getting the right people.
So why don't you build an academy? Like, I mean, or talk to the Joe's people about building an academy, right?
To train
and create them. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, we have the same problem at Research First. When we were much bigger, we were thinking the only way we're going to find the people we want other than poaching them from our competitors is going to be to build them ourselves.
When you were much bigger?
We used to be, a couple of years ago, we were, twice the size we are now.
Right. So you've actually scaled down?
Yeah.
Deliberately?
Well, only because of COVID, and it's we still have growth ambitions. How do you feel about that? This got nothing to do with this podcast, but how do you feel about that 10X stuff? Have you following any of that?
Grant Cardone?
Yeah.
I know Grant Cardone. I read his book years ago and was inspired. I also read his wife's book, Elena Cardone, Building an Empire, I think it was, or something like that.
Yeah.
Loved that book. Have gone off him a little bit lately. just with some of the stuff that he puts out online, it's a bit extreme for me.
Okay.
But yeah, a lot of the content that he has put out in the past
Yeah.
has really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Are you asking me how I feel about? Because a lot of people go, I want to grow 5%, 10%. His mentality would go, we'll just do it 100, 10x.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it's funny because when I was running a lot, I remember that was always the best advice I got from my running coach was don't add a kilometre, add 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just go.
I think what happens is that so like, for example, at the moment, I've been pretty open about this, we're trying to grow our business to $10 million revenue.
Yeah.
And so you kind of go, okay, what are some of the things that I could do to try and move closer to that goal? If you said to me, why would you not just grow it to 100 million? You'll probably get to 10 million much faster if your goal is 100 million.
Yeah, shoot for the sun, and if you miss, you'll hit the moon, right?
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you start making much bigger decisions or much different decisions. I guess it's good. I kind of like it, but it's never that easy though, is it? Why? What do you think?
What I think about you guys is what I've always thought about, which is if you can't own the Joe's brand, you're going to need to work out a way of setting up your own brand so that we know there's a brand over here that's got this magic, the Hustle Group magic behind it, and then you could grow that, right? Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this. We don't need to talk about this now, but
we can talk about it.
In many ways, it feels like the Joe's hold you back, right? Because it doesn't let you do the Anton Meyer magic piece. At scale.
Well, I guess we're trying to create other spaces where we can kind of demonstrate that we're more than just Joe's.
Yeah,
and I love Joe's.
Yeah.
It will always be part of the story.
Yeah.
And it's taught me a lot, and I'm grateful for it. But yeah, look, I think that's really what the airport is for us. It's an opportunity for us to kind of show people that left to our own devices, we can build something pretty cool.
But the thing about the airport, though, don't forget the thing about the airport is that's never going to be a community hub.
No, it's not.
Because it's people passing through, even regular travellers, right?
Yeah.
They're going to love it, but it's travellers, the thing we're talking about, at Joe's at Wigram is you're doing something else, right? There's some magic in there. You're providing. It'd be great you should ask your customers. Like, I think you'd find that there's a whole lot of your regulars that just keep coming back because it feels like home.
I guess I've just totally underestimated how valuable that is. I think that third space. I've got no reason to doubt you. If those statistics around loneliness are what they are, it's only going to become even more and more important.
Even more.
And it's a pretty cheap way to go and get access to a third space, right?
Exactly.
Not like the Quarter Club, which is hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? A great question to ask, and not just your cafe, but lots of cafes, would be, what percentage of people do you think come in the cafe and that's the only human contact they're going to have that day? Go back to that idea that we are surrounded by lonely people. They don't talk about it, so you don't know that. I guarantee there are more people than you think that come into Joe's, come into Fish, and that's the only human contact they have that day.
Yeah, that's a really unusual thing for people who work in our businesses to consider, because we literally crave silence. When you're working on the floor and you're talking to people all day, every day, sometimes what you actually crave is just to sit in your car and go,
solitude.
It's not solitude.
Yeah.
It's nice not to have so many, people coming and talking to me. But you're right though. That might be, for a lot of people, if their only kind of human contact or engagement that day is coming in and ordering their coffee, that's not something I'd consider.
So just go again. It comes back to that idea of we thought so much about physical health and mental health. We haven't thought much about social health. The fourth component that we haven't talked about today, and I know you've talked to other people on the pod about, is the notion of spiritual health, right? Which is the piece that rounds out the 4 quadrants. And spiritual health doesn't have to mean necessarily a faith, but you have to have a belief in something bigger than you, right? You've got to have a purpose. And these things, of course, they all intersect. But that's how we build healthy communities. That's how we build healthy families. That's how we build healthy people.
How do you think about spiritual health? Do you think about it? Because there'll be a lot of skeptics out there, because we know that religion has declined massively, right? But I know you said it's not necessarily
it's not necessarily about, well, I'll tell you something funny. There is a movement in the UK called the Sunday Assembly, which is a secular church.
Really?
Yeah. And what the people behind the Sunday Assembly worked out is going to church in your neighborhood has terrific benefits that have almost nothing to do with believing in God. Believing in God can hold everybody together, but people from the same neighborhood come together to be together on Sunday. So first of all, it builds community. You get some quiet contemplation, so you get to build your spiritual health. You get to talk to other people about your problems, and you get to sing together. Human beings have been singing together for 300,000 years. It's how we build connections and trust, right? And you take away the church and it takes away people's ability to do that. So I love the idea of the Sunday assembly.
And so this is a group of people that live in the same geographical area. They come together and they basically do all of those things, but there's no...
Exactly. Think about it. So like Riccarton over the road, right? Riccarton could have a church. That church could be deconsecrated and it could just become a community, secular assembly. Nobody talks about God. Nobody talks about any particular kind of God, but we still come together. And
that's interesting.
And because if you think about fellowship, fellowship's got nothing to do with religion. It's got everything to do with being together.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And so that's happening over in the UK?
It's happening over the UK. That's an amazing thing. It's like the other thing. There is research that shows that religious people live longer, recover from illness more effectively than others. They would say it's all about the power of God and prayer. Psychologists might say it's all about the power of fellowship, meaning, stability.
Where does the power of the mind come into all of that? Have you done any?
Yeah, lots and lots of it. I mean, and this is such a deep rabbit hole. In psychology, it often gets talked about under self-fulfilling prophecies. Like, what you believe, to a large extent, you can manifest, not through some magic secret, money turns up on your door, but by having a belief that you hold true, you will behave and orient yourself towards that goal, right? You'll start doing things that make that much more likely to be the case. I'm a huge believer in optimism. In fact, one of the rules we have at our company now is if we have two candidates for a role that are equivalent, we'll choose the more optimistic one. Optimistic people live longer. Optimism is a great way of approaching the world, right?
Yeah, we talk about things like, this is something I've been thinking a little bit about lately, because we just we have traits that when you say optimistic people, you will have heard that saying, like you can train behavior, but you can't train attitude. So then we say, okay, what sort of attitude are we looking for? We're looking for someone who's positive. And then the question becomes, okay, what do you mean by positive?
So a psychologist would say all of these things are continuums, right? So optimism, pessimism are continuum. So you're a profoundly optimistic guy. But that doesn't mean that you're always optimistic. Like, what I'd be interested in psychologically is tell me about those moments.
Kia ora everybody, me again, and I'm so sorry to have to interrupt that amazing kōrero with Carl prematurely. Unfortunately, we had some issues with our camera and our microphones that we didn't realize until well after Carl had left the building. I hope that you were enjoying the conversation so far, and the good news is we only missed the last couple of minutes of his kōrero. So I won't be able to say it as eloquently as Carl will, but I'll do my very best to summarize some of the last points that he left us with. When I asked Carl, what can we do as individuals to try and solve for some of these issues, he gave me some really simple and practical answers. He reminded me that most people won't wave, but everybody will wave back. So therefore, be the person that waves. Most people won't smile at you, but every time you smile at them, they'll smile back. So be the person that smiles. When you're standing in line, just turn around and say hello to the person behind you. It's simple stuff, guys. But those moments of engagement could well be the only social interaction that other person has that day. So the onus is on people like us. So let's take a little bit of responsibility. Let's talk a little bit more to strangers. Talk to our neighbors. Smile at people when we walk past them. Wave at our friends and our whānau. And for those of us who are in the privileged position of being able to talk and socialize with human beings every single day, take that responsibility seriously, because your 30-second conversation at the till, in the retail shop, in the local cafe or bar, may well be the only social interaction that person has that day. So make the most of it. Anyway, e hoa, Carl's an awesome guy, and I don't need to tell you that. If you want to find out more about Carl and his business, Truwind Research First, head along to this website. And for goodness sakes, if you see him on the street, give him a wave and say kia ora. Until next time, e hoa, thank you very much for taking the opportunity and tuning in to Beyond the Hustle. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Ngā mihi.